Have you ever studied the Bible? Have you ever considered it? You know, when I first was challenged to study the Bible, it was not even in my radar because I didn't think there was anything worthwhile in the Bible. I thought it was a collection of cultural myths and stories that had been gathered over a lot of generations to kind of prop up the Jewish culture and maybe hold up Christianity. It was probably, in my opinion, mistranslated and abused over centuries and couldn't possibly contain anything reliable. I had no idea whether there was any evidence to support my opinion. That's just what I had assumed. I'd been told various things by people, and over the years, I guess I had just added to those opinions from other people in my own thinking. And so at one point when someone challenged me to study about Jesus, I said, "Oh, I don't think so, because why would I read the Bible? There's nothing true in there." Well, after I was challenged to study the evidence for the Bible, I was really surprised at what I discovered. And as I looked at some of the evidence for the reliability and began to dig through evidence, actual evidence about both the Old and the New Testament, I became more and more convinced that I was dealing with a reliable historical document. For instance, did you know that there are more than 25,000 fragments of the New Testament documents? There's 600 or more actual manuscripts in the New Testament. Now, there are far fewer manuscripts of the Old Testament, but there's good reasons for that. It has to do with how Old Testament scribes copied and then carefully destroyed the older manuscripts because of their great reverence for what they viewed to be the Word of God. But of course, I didn't know any of those things when I first undertook to study the reliability of both the Old and the New Testament. What I learned is that the Old Testament, written in Hebrew language over about 1,500 years, and the New Testament, written in a much shorter time, about 50 or 60 years in the Greek language, were written by about 43 or 44 different authors, and they were compiled by a variety of different editors put together by different groups of people, but they have one common theme, even though they're written by such a variety of different writers. And that common theme is God's relationship with human beings. And in the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament, even though Jesus is not mentioned specifically by name in the Old Testament, he is the central focus of both the Old and the New Testament, in prophecy in the Old Testament and in eyewitness testimony in the New Testament. In the New Testament, it's very interesting to note that in archaeological studies, it's clear to point out that the author Luke names 32 countries, 54 cities, 9 islands, numerous Roman governors and magistrates, and commanders without error. They can clearly be demonstrated to be historical entities and actual places. Very few, if any, ancient documents from antiquity can compete with the New Testament as far as the reliability of naming various magistrates or places or battles as the New Testament does. Now, the Old Testament is also rich in evidence that can be archaeologically proven as the Old Testament. Now, this doesn't mean that the things recorded therein are true. Those are different questions altogether, and they have to do with exploring not only through the eyes of faith, but also as you explore through the written narratives of the writers there. For instance, the writers in the New Testament claim to be eyewitnesses of the events that they record. And the records that they recorded were in circulation in a very short time in comparison to the events that are recorded. Now, that's important because when they were circulated, they were available as other people were still living who could easily have refuted the historical reliability of the accounts that were recorded in their writings. That means that, for instance, if their accounts of the crucifixion or the resurrection were conflated or made up, there would be plenty of people who could have refuted those accounts, coming forward to say, no, those are not at all events that happened in that time period. Now, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found some decades ago, they gave us a new historical glimpse at the accuracy of the methods that the Jewish scholars had used for centuries in copying Old Testament records until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered beginning in 1947. The oldest documents that we had to support the Old Testament came from the 8th and 9th century AD. But when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the writings therein came from the 2nd century BC, and they showed the accuracy of what had been available 1,000 years earlier, and it showed accuracy almost to the exact letters used, for instance, in the Isaiah scroll, which is available in the Hebrew University, the Shrine of the Book Museum in Jerusalem, and facsimiles that are available in many museums. A very exciting find, which helped to support the reliability of the scribes and Pharisees and the means that they used to copy those ancient manuscripts. There are so many other evidences. I would really urge you to look at some of the various writings by people like Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel, who explore more about the things that can support and bolster your understanding of where the Bible came. Because after all, if you're going to base your beliefs on the things written in the Bible, you really ought to know where it came from, don't you think?